taking notice of Nigeria, Canada's drugs and driving problem, and our book of the week. I'm Madeleine White. Welcome to Globe Now. The situation in Nigeria has become more violent, and it comes on the heels of the Western world taking notice. On Tuesday, 8 more girls were stolen from their villages in another suspected Boko Haram attack. And yesterday, the Associated Press reported the terrorist group is also being blamed for a violent rampage which killed about 300 people in northeastern Nigeria. All this comes in the wake of interest in the Bring Back Our Girls campaign sparking across the globe. This map plots out protest tweets based off geotags and shows a marked increase in activity in the US, Europe, and the rest of Africa after April 29th. And the number of celebrities supporting the cause has also grown. In the last few days, the hashtag has broken through the Twitterverse, with protests for these kidnapped girls happening not only in Nigeria, but all over the world. This public outrage has put pressure on Western governments to respond, and many have. The United States, France, and the UK have all pledged specialized teams to help with locating and negotiating the release of the girls. Canada has also offered support. It's sending surveillance equipment. The Nigerian president has praised the aid and declared this the moment that marks the, quote, beginning of the end of terror in Nigeria. But when pressure builds, there is a question of tensions reaching a boiling point. And when that happens, we can only hope the kidnapped girls don't end up getting hurt. Stay with us. Up next, we look at what Canada is doing about drivers who are high behind the wheel. Most everyone will agree that drinking and driving is dangerous behavior, but what about taking drugs and driving? Does Canada need stronger laws for this behavior? Jessica Leeder has written about this issue in today's paper, and she joins us now. So first off, Jessica, how do we know that this is a problem in Canada?
We know that increasingly when we look at mortalities and fatality reports, that drugs are showing up almost more than alcohol in the systems of drivers who have lost their lives in accidents. We know that 60,000 drivers a year are charged for alcohol-related incidents, but only 1,000 for drugs. So the numbers aren't quite matching up.
Now, of course, this probably is a very difficult problem to police because different people have different reactions to drugs. So what are law enforcement officers trying to do about that?
Well, it's the question that has dogged them for years. I mean, with alcohol, it goes immediately into the bloodstream, and tests work exactly the same to detect concentrations for everyone. With drugs, right now, the most common test used is a physical roadside test, where police who go for special training can detect the use of main classes of drugs. But we know there are some sort of high-level studies happening now to determine whether or not we should be using an oral roadside test similar to a breathalyzer.
Now, I noticed that you brought in some of these oral tests. Can you tell me a bit about them? Show me how they work.
Yeah, so these are 2 of the most common and most highly thought of tests that are on the market right now. Police are testing them to see about their accuracy. Both of them work by being either licked or swabbed in the driver's mouth. This one has to be put into a machine to give a result. This one, similar to a pregnancy test, really just needs to have the antibodies activated by pushing a button. Within minutes, you'll have a line that tells you whether or not a driver has been using drugs within a reasonable doubt.
So these things are available for the regular public? Like you could just go online and buy one of these?
Yeah, they're not cheap. This would be the one that you would go online to buy because you don't need a machine to give you a readout result. It retails for about $35. Australian police are using it now. And for a long time, drug tests have been popular with parents looking to see whether or not their kids are using before driving.
Fair enough. And I mean, for parents, you often hear when you confront teenagers who are doing this behavior that the teenager thinks, well, it's not really affecting me. I know you spoke to some people about that in your piece. What do you have to say to those people who have the perception that getting behind the wheel high is not actually affecting their driving ability?
Yeah, well, it is affecting their driving ability, and experts will attest to that. I mean, the numbers of fatalities that are related to drug use are an indication that when you're driving high, even if you think that you're not impaired, you may be. And because we metabolize, again, drugs differently than alcohol, marijuana, for example, can cause impairment up to 5 or 6 hours in some cases after it's used, even though mentally the driver may not feel they're impaired.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jessica.
Thank you.
Well, we want to hear from you. Do you think taking drugs and driving is a more worrisome problem than drinking and driving? Would you ever use one of these in-car drug tests? You can find us on Twitter. We're at Globe Now. And now we switch gears a bit to our book editor's pick of the week. It's a story set in a dystopian New York City, and you see this post-nuclear world through the eyes of a garbage man turned assassin whose weapon of choice, 'Choice' 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 '
One of the novelist's great playgrounds is setting, place, where you decide to tell your story. Canadian journalist Adam Sternberg moved to New York in the early 2000s, so when it came time for him to write his first novel, a magnificent little thing called Shovel Ready, he decided to take his adopted home city and turn it on its head. And what he ended up with, a blend of science fiction, dystopia, and a very strong element of hard-boiled detective fiction. Sometime in the future, a dirty bomb has gone off in Times Square in New York and left much of the city decimated. And the structure of the city has devolved to the point that there's a kind of super elite rich and an extremely poor poor. In through all of this mix comes a man named Spademan, who's Adam's central character. And Spademan used to be a garbage man, and now he's a hitman, kind of prowling the streets, taking advantage of this new condition in New York. And the result of all this is a book written in really compressed, dense language, lots of dialogue, lots of action. It's kind of really immersive. And if it sounds sort of far-fetched, Sternberg has pointed out that if you asked a New Yorker of 30 years ago to predict the condition of the city today, this sort of like playground for billionaires, they certainly would have been able to do it. And that's what all great sci-fi does. It takes our present-day anxieties and turns them inside out. So here he takes our fears, our anxieties about what might happen in a terrorist sense, what's happening in terms of the economic shifts within our society, and projects them forward and kind of brings back this document that encapsulates everything we're scared of and scares the living daylights out of us as we read it.
That's it for today's show. Thanks for joining us. If you've got a moment, hop onto Twitter. Do you think Canada ought to pledge more support in the fight against Boko Haram? Or do you think this is a situation where we should just stand on the sidelines? You can find us at Globe Now. I'm Madeleine White. Thanks again for watching.